Hello, one and all, and welcome to the podcast we call the Fantastival with myself, Stephen Nussbaum. In the podcast, where I invite my guests to come on and talk to me all about their musical tastes, their memories, their experiences, and they get to collate their fantasy festivals, which I have christened Fantastivals. I hope everyone is doing well in these times. There's some crazy times, some scary stuff going on in the world. I hope this podcast finds you all well. And before we start this one, just want to say a massive thank you to Matt from the amazing Apollo Junction, who was my guest in the last episode of the Fantastival Podcast. And don't forget, on the Friday, the 20th of October, they bring out their long-awaited third album, Here We Are, along with the Heavy North will also release their amazing second album, Delta Shakedown. So Friday, the 20th of October, going to be a massive day for new release albums. So that was 141. I'm delighted that we're on to 142 now of the Fantastival Podcast. And this week, I'm delighted to introduce a man of many talents, singer, songwriter, psychologist, Eggman, author. You may know him from the Boo Radleys, you may not do. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Dr Sice.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful intro.
Had to be done, and I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. And before we talk music, I think I always like to talk about mental health. It's very apt, considering mental health has been this week. Always like to check in with my guests. So, mate, how are you?
I'm actually good. Yeah, no, I'm actually okay at the moment. I feel very fulfilled at this kind of stage in my life, and so at the moment I'm really good. I'm doing a lot of things that interest me. I've just been out and done my solo tour, which was about music, comedy, mental health, and so that was fantastic. So I'm actually feeling quite kind of fulfilled, really. Yeah, I'm in a good place.
That's great to hear. So let me take you back to talk about kind of your early music memories. What are your earliest musical memories? What do you remember about music from your childhood?
The thing about music for me in my childhood was really the influences of the radio. My family wasn't big on music. We didn't. Mainly, I think, through money. You know, my family, my dad and mum didn't own a lot of albums. The one of the earliest influences on me hearing it for the first time was this kind of covers album of Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel, and that's kind of, I think that's provided the blueprint. As I got older, it was quite a sort of disparate group of influences. You know, my eldest brother was kind of into kind of electronica, so he would listen to Jean-Michel Jarre. My other brother was a punk, so there were punk influences there. He used to love the Stranglers, and really the radio was the big thing, you know, the huge influence. So when I really started getting into music for myself around the age of sort of 10, it was the radio and it was the charts that were the big thing for me. So you know, anything from that point on, really, you know, Blondie, kind of Depeche Mode, Wham, just the whole Duran Duran, the pop world, you know, that was my big sort of introduction, which is why I've always loved pop music.
And what was your introduction to kind of getting involved in music? Was there a seminal moment where you thought, yeah, I want to be involved in music, or was it just a gradual thing that kind of escalated?
It was the seminal moment, really. I mean, I don't remember it, but I remember the one thing was Top of the Pops, you know, seeing Top of the Pops sort of every week. It was like a big event that you would gather around to watch. And I remember just thinking, that's what I want to do. You know, that's the thing that I want to do. And then that's what grabbed me. And then I don't think there was anything else in my mind that's what I was going to do. You know, throughout the 80s, we would sort of start to pick up guitars and so therefore started to listen to more guitar music. So, you know, we then really got into the Smiths and kind of Jesus and Mary Chain and a lot of mid-80s bands and C86 bands. And then that was kind of the step off into actually doing it around 1980, 88 was probably when we did our first gig, you know, when we were about 17, 18.
And how did the Boo Radleys come to be then? How did you form the first, I guess, incarnation of the Boo Radleys? Was it a bunch of mates, or did you meet people through other people in the scene? How did you get together?
We were in school together. You know, we were in school together. So me and Martin were sort of one group, and then Tim and a couple of other mates were in a different group, and we would play gigs. We would go and see them play, and we would play. And then finally we asked Tim to sort of play bass for us, and that was it really. The three of us have been a unit since we're a sort of musical unit. We sort of tried a lot of different drummers until we found Rob, who was perfect. And then that was it. We were always set as that unit really until we split up.
And were you surprised by, I guess, from obviously forming in 1988, it wasn't too long until you actually get signed and release like your debut album. I guess looking back, the Elegance of Youth can kind of pull you through a lot. Were you surprised how quickly it took you to get a deal and get your first album out?
I don't know, to be honest. Looking back, it's like they always say, overnight successes take a long time. So I think it probably was quite quick, but I think we were always impatient. We were always impatient for the next stage to come along. So I think at the time, I don't think we thought it was quick. But looking back, it was, we'd only done maybe a dozen gigs before we got signed. But I think, it was always the quality of the songs was always there. So it was a fairly quick progression onto what we would call a kind of proper label, where we were signed to Rough Trade. But then, I don't think we were particularly surprised by it because we did always have a lot of kind of ridiculous self-belief. There was a huge amount of which I think you need. I think any band to get anywhere needs that kind of just irrational self-belief, that when other people kind of give up and go back to normal jobs, we were just like irrationally saying, no, we're not stopping this. This is what we do, and so that was hugely helpful. So it was quite it was quite quick, but it didn't take us by surprise because we expected it.
And in third album, Giant Steps, which came out in '93, is actually 30 years old now. I mean, you must look back on that period and go, well, it must feel like yesterday, I'm presuming, or not feel like that long ago.
It really does. I mean, it is very, very strange how time goes, and yeah, 30 years is just ridiculous. We had 10 years after it had gone, we had a bit of a kind of retrospective, and 10 years felt like a long time. But 30 years is just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. It does feel very fresh. I don't know what it says about the pop world that actually, I think that the pop world has kind of stalled, or certainly the music world has kind of stalled because that doesn't sound old. If we were kind of making, say in 1993 when Giant Steps was released, if we look back to a record that was 30 years old, back to 1963, that record would sound old. It would sound very different. But things have kind of, I think the pace of advancement in sort of popular music has kind of slowed down, really.
When I was reading up on Giant Steps, I read a fact that it was voted as the second best album of the year by the NME in 1993. I mean, that's a big, at that point when NME was so influential, that's a very big big statement to have behind you.
It was a timing thing, really. I mean, I think, that album was released, I don't know, I think it was August 93. So I think it was I think it had been reviewed well. And I think there was a groundswell about it. And I think it was one of those things that nobody disliked. I think that's one of the things with these albums of the year thing. It's not necessarily whether it's a bit like, kind of things that nobody dislikes are the ones that get voted through. So yeah, I mean, I think that was an apex of a point where we were kind of completely hip, I suppose. That was the kind of the point. So there was a lot of voting for us and there was a lot of name checking, but it didn't really translate to record sales or radio play. So that's what I mean about the kind of, we were always looking for something else. Is that, so we had this great critical acclaim, but it was kind of almost like, well, yeah, but we're not in the charts. We're not playing big venues, sort of thing.
You mentioned radio play and record sales. I guess that leads in beautifully to the next album and the next single, Wake Up. So you signed to Creation at a time where Creation were obviously very big. And then we'll obviously have to talk about the Wake Up single, which I heard last week. It was funny. I obviously had you booked for the podcast and I was walking past a bar in Liverpool Street and I heard Wake Up blaring out and I kind of chuckled to myself and I thought, it must be fate that you're about to come on the podcast. I mean, any idea when you were recording that track and the album, the idea of how successful that was going to be? Because it felt that summer, that was one of two songs that I would always hear on the radio at any given point, at any station, at any time of day.
I mean, it's really weird because, talking about giant steps, I was just on Twitter over the last couple of days. I've seen that it's 30 years since one of the singles off Giant Steps, "Wish I Was Skinny," was released, and it said that single got to number 75. And it was quite good to read that, because that was the arena that we were kind of dealing in, and this was kind of, I guess, the pressure that we were getting, that it was kind of like, yeah, look, it's all very well having this acclaimed album, but your singles are getting to number 75, and so part of the pressure was, right, let's make you've got to make a single that's going to chart. You've got to make a chart single. And I think, Martin, as a songwriter, kind of took on that challenge wholeheartedly and said, right, you want a fucking pop song? I'll give you a fucking pop song. And kind of, and really, I think that kind of, it was almost done too well. It was kind of, it overshadowed everything else that we wanted to do. And, it may have been a lot better for us to have just kind of actually stuck with our guns and said, actually, sod you, but the problem is that, when people are talking about your chart position and stuff, and your record company are talking about that, you're thinking, well, if we don't do this, are we going to have a record company? So you have to sort of make these almost kind of financial decisions, about your music. So, yeah, it was a weird time to say. I mean, at the time we enjoyed it, but we just didn't know that it was kind of going to overshadow everything else we did, really, which was that was kind of a disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, did you find it difficult to move on, I guess, from the success of that track then? Because obviously more albums follow, but were you under pressure, I guess, to have another, with the record company calling for another wake up? Or
we didn't really, because we just thought, right, brilliant, we've done it, we've done what's expected, we've had a top 10 single, lift off, and so but what we immediately thought is that we'll make an album that's more experimental and more kind of a bit out there, with lots of influences and lots of adventures. So we made Come On Kids, and I think we were just a bit naive and probably a bit sort of, I don't know, not misguided, but what we didn't really realize was that, when the Wake Up album sold, I don't know, whatever it sold, 250,000 copies, 200,000 of those were never going to be interested in anything else but the Wake Up single, and we thought, oh, brilliant, so our next album, 250,000 people are going to buy it, so let's give them this amazing kind of extravaganza. But of course that wasn't the nature of it, that wasn't, these people were buying that album for the Wake Up single and really weren't interested in us as a band. So, I think we were a little bit naive about that, but the good thing is that actually, we weren't affected by Wake Up. We just did what we wanted to do. We were kind of like, okay, look, we've done a pop album, we've done a big pop single, now we want to do the next thing, we want to make something different.
And you've done that, and also done the Eggman album. How did you find doing the Eggman album? I guess going from a band environment into a solo environment.
Well, the bizarre thing is that it still was a band environment. I mean, it wasn't really a solo environment. It was a very strange little thing that I did. I had these songs, and somehow the idea came up that it should be a solo album. But the bizarre thing is that the Boo Radleys were all over it. Rob played drums, Tim was on it, Martin was on it, and I was getting creation people down from it. 18-Wheeler and Moose and Ed Ball and just lots of different people. So it was a very quick thing, really. It was very quick. It was done in a couple of weeks, and it was really fun. But I remember it being quite sort of pressured. I remember it being kind of, right, we haven't got very much time to do this. We've got to get it done quickly. But it was a really nice thing to do. It was kind of it was almost part and parcel of the Boo Radleys thing, because it was creation. So it was the same stuff, and it was the Boos down a studio that we already knew. So it didn't feel that different.
And in the last Boo Radleys album in a while came out in '98 with King Size. I think I've read a few quotes from yourself saying by that time I think it had kind of run its course, and you were happy at that point for it to kind of end as it did.
Yeah, it was a shame, really, because I think, I look back and I think it was a shame, because I think it's a great album, but I think we were tired. We were tired and we were a little bit lost, and everything was dying. Britpop was dying, and Creation Records was going under, and the kind of, I guess, enthusiasm was kind of going, and it just seemed like it was time. We were all tired. I think Tim had the sort of, the main impetus to kind of keep going, because he loves the studio, so he was down at the studio a lot working, but I think the rest of us were a bit kind of a bit jaded with it, really. And ideally what we should have done is take a break at that point, but it just felt like it was, we've always kind of worshipped the Beatles, and so the whole thing is that, look, when it's over, you stop. That was what we believed. So that was the point that we said, okay, it's done, we stop.
And how did you find, I guess, not being in the Boo Radleys, because you kind of went a bit quiet on the music front, or kind of seemed to step away from it? How did you find, I guess, the transition from going to album touring, obviously playing some big venues, festivals, to kind of just taking a step back?
I was glad. I mean, I was really glad, because I think I was just tired, and I think by 2005, I think a sort of, 5-year break, I was probably ready to go back to it. But I think at that stage, and I did go back and make another kind of solo band album in 2005. But then I realized it really wasn't for me anymore, and I kind of needed something else. It didn't feel right. I had young children at that stage, and it just didn't feel right. So that was when I kind of took things in a different direction and thought, actually, I need to do something else. So that's when I started to retrain as a psychologist. And it was only sort of, and I did that and didn't really get involved in music for sort of 12, 13 years after that, So it was a long time, yeah. But it never really bothered me. I never wanted to be involved during that time.
It's an amazing achievement to be a psychologist, so I can only congratulate you for going back into it after, because I can't even imagine the amount of work it's taken to get to where you are. But I guess 2021, the Boo Radleys reunited, I guess, without Martin. Was that off the back of lockdown and being a bit older and being able to look back in a different view of the Boo Radleys? What kind of drove the reuniting?
It wasn't lockdown, really. Lockdown kind of got in the way. What it was I think 2018, something changed in me. Before that, I'd had no interest in music. I was running my private practice. I was a psychologist, and I was perfectly happy with that. And then something shifted in me. I started picking the guitar up again. I started playing at home. And I was saying to my daughter at the time, I was saying, I might go out and busk, because I just actually enjoy playing, and I kind of feel like I want to do it again. So I was almost setting that up when an email came through from a guy called Jules Reed, who was running this thing in Oxford, which isn't far from me. Basically, people from Liverpool play a solo show at the Oxford Jericho Tavern, and he asked me to do it. And for the first time in years, I thought, do you know what, I do want to do this. So I did that, and then I did a couple of other things, and that kind of sparked it, really. Tim saw me play, and I think he felt the bug, bitten by the bug, seeing me again. So that was when we kind of got in touch and started writing songs, and that's how it kind of started to sort of coalesce and started to get bigger. It was never set off with an intention of anything, really, until suddenly, we were working on these songs, and suddenly it was like, oh wow, we've got an album. What do we do with this now?
And obviously, you released the first one since being reunited, Keep On With Failing. I guess, what was different about that album in terms? Obviously, co-writer's not there, or the songwriter.
Yeah.
What was that? I guess that's the biggest difference, right? Or obviously, recording 20 years later, what were the biggest differences that you found?
Well, the biggest difference was the method of recording. Obviously the biggest difference was Martin not being there, but that also, fell in with the method of recording. So, back in the day, the way it would work was that, we'd all have to kind of set off to a big studio somewhere, and you'd spend day after day kind of working on the tracks. And this wasn't like that. This was more kind of, chucking files backwards and forwards. We lived geographically very far. Tim lives in Northern Ireland, Rob's in Manchester, I'm down near Oxford. So we were basically sending tracks back and forward. And what that meant is that it meant we worked in a very different way. So there wasn't any kind of compulsion to work like there is in a studio. What we were instead doing is that at times when we had the energy and the time, we'd go and work on it on our own and put ideas down that we'd send back and forward. So it built very differently. And so the whole process was completely different to how it would have been in the past. So that made it, the fact that it was different songwriters, but actually, it still very much sounds like the Boo Radleys. That's one of the weird things, is that, you take out what I guess people thought was a crucial element, and it still kind of pretty much still is the Boo Radleys. And I think that would be the case.
And recently, you've just released your latest album, 8. So congratulations, fantastic album.
Thank
and still
you.
Seems like it's very much full steam ahead for the Boo Radleys as we look into the future.
Yeah, I mean that album and it's this year has been a sort of a mix of kind of looking forward and looking back. And one of the things that we've sort of realised is how important the legacy is. We did Giant, like I say, it's been 30 years since Giant Steps. So in June we did a Giant Steps tour where we went out and we played that album in full, and that was incredible to see how much that album means to people and how much they loved it. And actually, it was great for us to play. One of the things was, I always thought, I'm not really interested in revisiting this stuff, but actually, going out and playing it again was fantastic, and so I think there'll be a full steam ahead element of kind of new stuff, but also weaving in that stuff that is there from the past.
Yeah, obviously, I guess Wake Up is the next one that will turn 30 years old sooner rather than later, and obviously massive album and a massive single. So we've spoken about live dates, but you've actually got a bit of a live tour coming up, right? So you're going on tour with Cud.
Yeah, that was an idea that was put to us good about, I don't know when it was, 6 months ago or so, of kind of, look, these dates are there, would you want to do it? And we were kind of, I wasn't really familiar with Cud very much. We played with them once back in the 90s, but our paths never really crossed. But, part of it was just like, yeah, absolutely. We just want to go out and play. And part of that appeal is playing to another band's audience. That people will come along and think, hopefully there will be some Cud fans who are like, oh, I don't know about the Boo Radleys. And we get that opportunity to impress them. I always liked that kind of, not necessarily having a captive audience, but kind of having to impress an audience, that challenge of that, and knowing that you've got the material to do that was always a thing that I enjoyed. So hopefully it'll be a little bit like that.
So if anyone wants tickets for that, they can find tickets on any good ticketing platform. I think you're going to Islington Academy in early November. There's a few dates up and around the country.
Absolutely, yeah. So, they start, I think, 28th of October and then run through to 3rd of November, I think.
And also, if you weren't busy enough to take you back, you've also written a novel. So being in a massive band, being a psychologist and an author as well. So, I mean, you've achieved an awful lot. Yeah, it does seem like that. And when you rattle that stuff off, it kind of feels like it. But it has been over a long period of time. That has been over 30 odd years. Yeah, I mean, I think that was the novel thing was something that I kind of did pretty much after the band had stopped. Actually, I think. One of the things was it was a kind of way to sort of fill any downtime I'd had. We'd recently had a baby, and so when he was asleep during the day for a couple of hours, it was something for me to do with my time. So I would sit and sort of write, and it took a long time to get it into shape, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed having it there. I think part of the thing is that I did enjoy writing, but then when I started actually training, I had to do my undergraduate degree and then went on to do a doctorate for 4 years, which involved so much writing that actually it completely almost burned me out in terms of writing. That took over. I probably would have written a lot more kind of fiction and stuff if those 7 years of constant writing hadn't taken over, and of course people won't see that writing, but it was there. I've got a kind of 60,000 word doctorate to account for it. Great stuff. So to take you back to the music, is there anything at the moment that you're listening to, whether that's a newer artist or an older artist, anything what's on your playlists or on your speakers at the moment?
At the moment, the album that I've sort of been drawn to that I quite like is James came out not long ago. James Yorkston's album, I forget what it's called, The Great White Eagle, Great White Sea Eagle. I think that's the one that I'm drawn to. But I tend. Artists are always a difficult one for me. I'm not a huge artist fan. I think that what I am is a fan of songs. And I think, the thing for me that I always really enjoy is kind of finding the new songs. So I really enjoy playlists. I really enjoy the radio, and finding whether it's, a new pop song or whether it's just an artist, or an old track, just any of those things are kind of, that's what I really like. So I always find it a difficult challenge when we're focused. People say, "What artists do you like?" It's kind of like, well, there are some, but I kind of really like a very diverse range of songs, and that can be anything, from the 1930s to now. So there is a vast amount to choose from.
I always like taking my guests back to when they bought their first record and that experience. Remember buying your first record and what that was?
I do remember buying my first record. I mean, there were records probably bought for me. I think there were things like the Wombles and stuff that were probably bought for me. But the record that I saw on Top of the Pops that I wanted to buy and was taken to buy with my pocket money, and I don't know when this was released, so I'm probably 8, I think, was Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. I remember seeing that on Top of the Pops, and just, I think the whole thing of that, the music appealed, the video very appealed because it was a cartoon, and the whole refrain of "Hey teacher, leave those kids alone" probably appealed. So I remember that was the one that that was the single that I wanted to have. So that was the first one.
Great single as well. So this podcast is all about you collating your fantasy festival. Are you a big fan of the festival? I mean, I'm presuming you've played many a festival, but are you a big fan of the festival?
It's really weird. I'm quite ambivalent towards them. I do enjoy them being there, but I think the whole 3-day thing, I like my creature comforts. The whole 3-day thing in a tent, no, I can't do it. If I was able to do a festival and go back off to a nice house and come back, and I would quite happily do it. But I'm far too fond of my comforts to be able to kind of handle 3 days on a farm.
Do you have any favourite festival experiences when you were playing back in the day or recently? Do you have any favourite festival experiences?
The playing festivals was brilliant. I always loved playing festivals, but my best experience watching was Reading in 1991, and that was so exciting because we kind of went for the first time when we were in a band. We didn't play. Or did we play? No, I don't think we did play, but we had backstage passes. Someone had got us backstage passes. And so there was the whole, then the most amazing thing is that I watched Nirvana right down the bill. This was before they went absolutely global. This was just before Smells Like Teen Spirit was released. And I remember watching Nirvana right down the bill on Reading Festival on the main stage before Chapter House, before other people, but there was Nirvana. And they were absolutely incredible. And I remember kind of that's one of the sort of treasured memories from a festival. Playing festivals, I think, we did a lot because we actually did a Lollapalooza tour in America. And that was very, very strange, but very, very fascinating to do. And I've got a lot of really good memories from that as well, playing in the absolute blazing heat in the desert and, open to the sun was just like the most bizarre experience, but all good. Yeah, good.
Yeah, sounds incredible. So, like I said at the top of the podcast, tonight, Dr. Sice gets to collate his fantasy festival. So for any first-time listeners, the podcast format is very simple. Dr. Sice gets to choose any 5 acts, one of whom must play one of their studio albums in full. And he also gets to pick an encore, which can be any track from any artist that all of his 5 acts can perform together to close his fantasy festival. So 5 acts take 5 time slots. And like I mentioned, I had Matt Wilson on from Apollo Junction. And last week he collated his Ready for the Launch fantasy festival. He had Madness as his opening act. In his Super Seconds act, he had Daft Punk. Midway Madness, he picked the Smiths. In his pre-headline act, for the first time ever, U2 got picked for a fantasy festival. and for his headline act, he picked the Beatles and had all 5 of his act play God Only Knows to complete his Fantasy Festival lineup. So a very simple concept. But before we talk about the acts who are going to make your Fantasy Festival lineup, we have to give your Fantasy Festival a name, and we have to give it a venue. So Dr Sice, what are you going to call your Fantasy Festival?
This is called Dr Sice's Musical Extravaganza, and egg spelled EGG.
I love what you've done there. And we can hold this anywhere in the world that you want to. We can hold it near Oxford, we can hold it UK, America, Australia, wherever you want to hold this, we will follow you gladly. So where are we going to hold your Fantasy Festival?
So this is going to be held at the Floral Pavilion Theatre in New Brighton. I don't even know whether it's still open, but it's open in my mind, because this was when I first went. My dad used to be into amateur dramatics, and so this was like the first taste of music I ever got, live music. And it was, I remember being a tiny kid, but this Floral Pavilion Theatre was just like the magical place. And in my memory, it's just this. It's probably a shithole, but in my memory, it was this kind of complete magical, wonderful place with a stage and all the arrayed seats and everything, and the ashtrays in the back of the seats and all that kind of stuff from the 1970s. So that's the place that I want it to be held, an indoor festival.
Beautiful. Can't beat an indoor festival. So that's where we're going, to the Floral Pavilion Theatre in New Brighton. So before we talk about your 5 acts, I know how difficult it is to get down to 5. There's many an act who would easily make your Fantasy Festival up if there were more. Any acts who you want to shout out, who you love, but just aren't getting into your Fantasy Festival lineup?
Yeah, the ones that I would have loved to have sort of squeezed in because I would want to see them. Well, one, I went for Nirvana, because I think they're just, an incredible live act, and I would have, having seen them, right at their prime, I would want to see them again. The other one that I never got to see, a band that I really, really loved throughout the very early 80s when I just got into music, was the Stray Cats. And again, I'd want to see, Brian Setzer is such an incredible guitar player that I would kind of really want to see that up close and personal. And I guess the other one that I thought that I would really love to have seen is Ray Charles. I would have loved to have seen the sort of whole Ray Charles experience, and that would, but they unfortunately didn't fit in those time slots. So maybe next year. Maybe next year
when the Extravaganza comes back for its second inclination. All right, so we've mentioned some great acts who aren't coming with us. It's time to go for the 5 who are. So 2:00, Floral Pavilion Theatre, New Brighton, absolutely rammed. Everyone's eagerly anticipating your first act, Dr Sice. So who's going to open Dr Sice's musical extravaganza?
Well, I've gone for Kate Bush because I think she's absolutely incredible. I mean, I think she's just, over time, she's just proved herself to be, absolute icon, and somebody who's kind of never been, there's never been anybody coming close to what she does, her invention. And I've never got to see it. When she did the sort of showings in London a few years ago, I would have loved to have seen it. So I think she fits the bill to kind of open the whole thing off. I think it would be really exciting to see Kate.
That's a great shout. Only the third time she's been picked for a Fantasy Festival lineup, so she's back on the bill. Okay. Any song, she only gets an hour. Any songs that she has to play for you that are an essential part of a Kate Bush set that you would have to have?
I think that with her, I think Cloud Busting is one that that absolutely sort of got hold of me, and I was really in love with that song. But actually, really, I'd say Kate can choose what she wants. That I would love to hear it, but she can absolutely choose what she wants. She is, I don't get to dictate.
So Kate Bush, opening an act. She's going to give us an hour of her time. It's going to be brilliant. We'll take a half-hour break. That'll take us 3:30. It's time for your Super Seconds act. So, Dr. Sice, who are you going to have as your Super Seconds act?
Well, I'm going to go for Prince again because it's somebody that I would have loved to have seen. I never saw, and I think the thing about it is that it's the aspect of it that I would really love is just that show. He would just put on such a show. He's such an incredible showman, incredible musician. And, he could choose any incarnation of his bands and people that he went with. Again, I'll kind of leave it to him. But, I think that sort of that following Kate, I think he would see that as a kind of challenge, and I'd love to see what he would do with that slot. And he's got, the wealth of material to cover that.
He certainly has. That's a very, very stellar lineup we've got. So for our opening 2 acts, we've got Prince and Kate Bush. A very strong start to the Fantasy Festival. So Prince plays from 3:30 to 4:30. We'll take another half-hour break, and that'll take us to our Midway Madness slot. So Dr. Sice, who's going to be your Midway Madness act?
Well, this is a very personal one, and it's a total fantasy one. But this is the one that I would like to have an album played in full. This is Nick Drake. I've absolutely loved Nick Drake ever since I heard him, and this is definitely a fantasy one because notoriously, he didn't really play live a lot. It was notoriously difficult, and so I think I would love to give Nick the opportunity to recreate Brighter Later the whole way through. It's a very sort of lush album. There are a lot of strings. There's a lot of kind of brass. There's backing vocalists. So I would want to give him the opportunity to be sort of backed properly and put that album out. There are a lot of other musicians, who were John Cale and stuff who featured on that album. So I would love them to be there playing it with him.
Great shout. That's what we're doing. Only the second time Nick Drake's been called up for a fantasy festival. I feel like Nick Drake is somewhat of an enigma because there's not actually that much material out there, and there's not very little video content. So someone who's probably much bigger than what he is, but there's just not much that you can delve into, I guess, for a casual fan.
Well, that's part of the appeal, I think, is the mystery of that. Is that kind of, how did this kind of young guy from a fairly sort of ordinary background, if you will, kind of came out and produced three kind of astonishing albums, and then famously talking about mental health earlier, he really struggled with depression. There's been a new book out, a biography really, which is heartbreaking to read. His struggle with it, and finally, he succumbed and lost his life, and which is a huge shame because he was really a massive musical talent, and so I think people are really sort of trying to make do with what is available there, because there isn't a lot. There's no footage of him playing live. There is no video footage of him at all as an adult. So it's kind of there's a mystery there. Absolutely.
Okay, great shout. So Nick Drake's going to give us an hour for Midway Madness and play Brighter Later. We'll take a half-hour break. So 3 acts down, 2 acts left. So next act is your pre-headline act. So you get to play from 6:30 to 8 o'clock. So who is going to be your pre-headline act?
Well, these set lengths are quite long, and this sort of really influenced my choices because there are plenty of people that I could kind of pick and think I wouldn't mind seeing them for half an hour or whatever, but I actually don't like long sets. I kind of get quite bored. Like I said, I like a lot of variety. So one of the only people I think who could fill that hour and a half and be absolutely rammed with it is Stevie Wonder. So, I would, for the same reason that I would go for Prince, Stevie Wonder is just somebody whose kind of musicality just absolutely blows me away. He kind of, changed the face of a lot of music in the 1970s, and so many good songs, for him to choose from, that he could actually, fill that slot and still be wanting more, So I think that has been so important in terms of kind of choosing somebody who can really fill that hour and 30.
Great shout. Stevie Wonder, his 5th Fantastival appearance, going to be your pre-headliner. It's going to be a fantastic pre-headline act. Again, we'll take a half-hour break, and that will leave us for our headline act who get to close your fantasy festival, who are going to play from 8:30 to 11 o'clock. So you've had an amazing first 4 acts, Dr. Sice, but who's going to headline Dr. Sice's musical extravaganza?
Well, again, following on from that kind of thing of who would I want to watch for 2.5 hours without getting bored and be thrilled with every element of it, and I'm sure this one has been a huge amount of times, and it's going to have to be the Beatles. It's going to have to be, I would be being disingenuous if I tried to think of somebody a bit more obscure or this kind of thing, because actually, if I had to do that, if I had to watch for 2.5 hours, I wouldn't want it to be anybody else. I'd be absolutely thrilled to kind of to see that happen. And I think for me, I really hope it is going to kind of happen soon, in that I went to see, talking about fantasy festivals, I went to see ABBA Voyage, and just seeing that kind of, okay, this is where this is going to go. And actually, it's not going to be long before the Beatles are kind of back on stage in terms of, in terms of artificial reality. That's going to be the creation. So it was interesting. So it kind of made me think, actually, yeah, that's what people are absolutely crying out for, and I guess that's what I want as well.
Great shout. So the Beatles, only the 9th time they've been picked. So
only the 9th.
Picked
okay.
I mean, that's one of the great things about this podcast. I guess you have in your mind all these classic acts are going to be picked every week, but they don't as much as what I guess you'd imagine they would do. But they've had 2 headline slots in a row. They're going to play from 8:30 to 11 o'clock. Then at 11 o'clock, they're going to bring back on stage Stevie Wonder, Nick Drake, Prince and Kate Bush. You've got an amazing wealth of talent on your stage, and they're all going to play one song to close your fantasy festival, and it's up to you what song they're going to play for you. So, Dr. Sice, what are you going to have as your encore for your fantasy festival?
Well, I think this is probably one of the greatest pop records ever made, and I would just love to hear. I mean, Stevie could probably do it on his own, and as could Prince, as could the Beatles. But I would love to hear how they kind of all put it together. This is "I Want You Back" by the Jackson 5, which I think is just one of the greatest pop songs ever written, I can't sit still as soon as I hear it. It just makes you move, and it's just so full of kind of joy of music. It's absolutely incredible. So I'd love to hear everybody there kind of how they brought that to the stage. That would be amazing.
That would be amazing. I think Prince is going to have the time of his life playing the intro into that with Stevie Wonder coming in on the keys. I think you've got
totally.
Absolutely nailed it there. So let's lock it in Dr. Sice. We've got Dr. Sice's musical extravaganza taking place at the Floral Pavilion Theatre in New Brighton. Opening act Kate Bush. Super seconds we have Prince. Midway Madness we've got Nick Drake playing his Brighter Later album. Pre-headline act Stevie Wonder. Headline acts the Beatles. And for your encore, they're all going to play "I Want You Back." Sounds like an amazing fantasy festival lineup to me. You happy with that one? To lock that one into our fantastic awards?
Absolutely, yeah, that's fantastic. I'm just disappointed that I don't get to see it now. I really want to see it.
I know. Well, hopefully, the way technology's going, maybe in 10 years we can bring these Fantastivals to life and have it happen in front of us. That would be quite something.
Yeah.
So before we wrap this up, then obviously you've got the upcoming tour with Cud. It's going to be great. What does the future look like after that? I guess what are your terms personally, and I guess for the Boo Radleys?
The Boo Radleys, not sure yet. Actually, we know we'll be doing stuff next year, but we're not actually sure what yet. We've got to kind of have a bit of a meeting and decide what it is that we want to do, where it is that we've got to go. We will definitely do more live dates because we've been loving that. So we're just going to sort of talk about what format that might take. Personally, I'll continue to do my day job as a psychologist, but the one thing that I want to do individually is the show that I've got, The Secret of Happiness, which is a one-man show with music and comedy and mental health. I want to take that on the road more, because that's something that that brings together the two things that I'm really passionate about, and kind of I get to talk about psychology, I get to talk about mental health, I get to talk about music, and I get to play music. And really, I've done sort of about 10 dates of that so far, and I'll want to do more of that next year. So that'll be my personal goal, to do more of those, and I really love doing that.
Brilliant. I look forward to hearing all about that and seeing that on social media in the future. So to shout out your social media, if anyone wants to keep on top of their news or your news, and if they don't already follow you, where can people find you, Dr. Sice, and what are your handles?
I haven't. If they look up Dr. Sice Boo Radleys, they'll find that Boo Radleys or Dr. Sice, Dr. Sice Boo Radleys. They're the handles. I haven't kind of got the actual ones to hand, but you'll find them. You'll find me.
You'll find him. He is out there. So that is it, everyone. Thank you for listening to the 142nd episode of the Fantastival Podcast. If you've enjoyed this one, please subscribe. You can give the Fantastival Podcast a review on iTunes. You can give the podcast a follow on Spotify, and you can also comment on the show, so you can actually comment on this episode. So if you've enjoyed it, please let us know on Spotify, and tell all your family and friends about the podcast. Dr. Sice is on Twitter, so are we. We are on Twitter at FantastivalP. You can find us there, and you can also give us an email at fantastivalpodcast@outlook.com. Unfortunately, we don't play music on this podcast, but I'll get some tracks from Dr Sice. We'll make a nice little playlist of the acts that he's chosen, and maybe whack in a few more tracks. And all you have to do is scroll down in your episode description. There'll be a nice little link in the episode description. That'll take you to a lovely little playlist that we'll make up. So I must say a huge thank you, Dr Sice, my 142nd Fantastival Podcast guest. I've really enjoyed talking to you. How have you found it?
Fantastic, absolutely. Well, yeah, fantastical. I've really enjoyed it, and it was a great thing to be able to, to sit there and think, wow, who would I have? That was absolutely brilliant. So I loved it. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I just can't get the idea of Prince now and Stevie Wonder jamming that intro out of my head all night. It's going to be in my head all night. But best of luck for the future. I look forward to seeing how the tour goes and how the rest of the year shapes out for you. So I'll be back next week with episode number 143. So please make sure to join me for that one. But until then, stay safe, my Fantastival friends. Please continue to spread the word. And that word is Fantastival. Thanks for listening.